Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today, when I say we've got a special guest and we've got a special topic, boy, do I mean it. Now, Margaret Dawson, who's the CMO at SUSE, and that just begins to kind of tell who you are and what you're doing. But you've been on the podcast before. And then at the end, we kind of started talking afterwards. And you had this amazing case study of how you throughout your career have been very customer focused, very customer obsessed, right? And that's made it into how you tell the story, build the go-to-market strategy, collect the customer voice, the data, structured, unstructured data, and weave it together with, especially with AI today, and really make an impact on growth and revenue in the business. And you've done that. And so this is a case study of sorts podcast today on what you've been able to do and how and why. But what did I leave out of there?
Yeah, I think that captures it. And I think you always make it sound so great. This is a journey that we're all on. I think the importance of this in any conversations we're having with our peers is how do we learn from each other? And I think the point you and I were making is, are there things that we've all learned that we can share and help others? Because I think we talked about this last time, was that there are foundational things that make a business, whether it's, marketing, sales, product management, product marketing, engineering, work just better, more optimized. And a lot of it is just clarity of who you are and what you do and why anyone should care. If anyone's been in a startup, and this is true even for large companies, like that initial understanding and clarity, whether you're pitching for funding or going to a customer or partner, is so important. And yet so often we jump over that and we immediately want to start talking about our products and features, right?
So I'm going to put a couple of industry studies on the table here, kind of the things that you're talking about foundationally that we know and actually have been proven, and then how you've kind of taken that foundation and applied it. So talking about customer obsession, there was a 2024 study done by Forrester, and they found out that only 3% of companies were customer obsessed. But the ones that were actually had a 49% lift in revenue, 51% lift in profitability. McKinsey came out with a different study and said only 15% of the companies actually incorporate voice of the customer into their decision-making. Can you believe that? 15% of companies, right?
I mean, I don't. The company that we always talk about here in Seattle is Nordstrom. Right. And gone through its own journey. And, I can be objective because I have never worked for Nordstrom. We hold that as a company that regardless of your industry, you look at and say, this is where the customer was always right. And the times in their history where they've lost that, it's directly impacted their revenue, even though people would say, oh my gosh, but if you take a product back and no questions asked, not even a receipt, and it wasn't even sold at your store and you still do it, you're going to lose money. But as we all know, that's not the way it is, because enough people say, oh my gosh, they treat me like I'm special, even if I'm buying a $20 shirt versus a $1,000 suit. And if you feel like you're being treated the same and you just keep going back and back, and that's what they've gotten is customer loyalty.
And that translates directly over into the world of B2B. Our expectations on B2C are exactly what they're becoming in B2B. And we know that this is a relationship-based business, and we want to feel special, and we want to do business with people we know and trust. And that's the other part of this, that we're in this trust epidemic is the way I like to say it. The recent trust barometer from Edelman showed that 68% of worldwide respondents think that business leaders like you and I are being intentionally misleading. And that impacts trust at such a significant level, which is why B2B buyers are waiting longer and longer to want to even talk to us. Earning trust early is key to getting on the day one shortlist, and 95% of the deals that get won are because they were on that day one shortlist.
I find that interesting. Did they ask that same question about agentic AI? You keep hearing the trust around AI. Can I trust it? But I wonder if people are almost giving AI trust before it's proven, and that which could be good or could be proven to be very dangerous, but they've stopped doing that with humans, is what you're saying.
The C-suite executives that I've been talking to have been taking AI and making their teams more productive, because we know B2B is all about relationships. So it's the human communication that really matters. We can be more present. We can focus more time on the communication. because our preparation, our work in advance is so much easier. But if we're not customer focused in like the customer data that you were talking about earlier, if we're not gathering that, then the AI tools, they're commodities, right? Everybody has Claude, everybody has Codework, everybody, you know?
I mean, here's what I'll say, because I know we were talking about this. One of the greatest ways to initially understand your customer data without necessarily talking to a customer, if you just want to get a sense of it, every company has sales calls that are now recorded, whether you're using Gong or, there's like 5 different tools that do that. They also have customer support data sitting in a platform somewhere, a CMS or a support platform, right? They probably have emails. They have other communications. They've got a bunch of data about customers, telemetry from their product. What is the customer using? How's our adoption? You can today, most likely, use AI to aggregate all that data, bring that in and analyze that and say, okay, are our products being used? Are our customers happy? What is our renewal rate? What is our churn? Is that aligned to the pains that we're solving? What is the number one thing that is coming up in sales calls, right? Is there a trend there? Are there words that are showing up? You combine that with LLM prompt data, with SEO search data from the market, and you bring that all together. And from there, you have a starting place that you can then go out and validate, with prospects and customers in real situations, whether primary, secondary, use analysts. But I think you've got to go meet with people and get that primary data yourself. And that's pretty much what we did. And so AI does make it easier, faster, especially around the aggregation or the trends. Whereas, I mean, I'll be honest, like I've done this my whole career and it used to spend weeks sometimes doing that because you're trying to understand, or you're doing primary data, but then you find out, oh, I wish I'd asked these 3 questions. So all of that can inform, okay, we kind of know here's the top 10 things. Like it just keeps getting repeated. And that's what we saw is like there were these themes that no matter what data source we looked at, they were just repeated over. And then we went out and got validation and actual quantitative data, and then put that together and went back out to customers and said, does this feel right? This is what we're hearing. This is what you told us. And they said, yes. And so from that, we said, okay, if we look at these top pain points, challenges, whatever you want to call them, these are the things that people are trying to solve for. And the other thing that I find really helpful is not just saying these are like my top pains. You want to then say, okay, are those showing up then as the top priorities at your company? Because sometimes the pain and the business priorities ain't aligned. You can be in a lot of pain and the company says, yeah, I hear you, we need to focus on these 2 things. And then throw in investment. So the 3 areas that we talked to customers about and then we got data around was like, what would you say are your top 10 business priorities? What are your top IT priorities? How does that translate into what you are investing? And then it all starts with like, what are your biggest pain points, right? And you kind of get a point. It's like, okay, where do we have permission to play within that area? Because obviously not all the pain points can we solve with our solutions, right? Cybersecurity is a huge pain point. We do not have a cybersecurity solution, but that tells me that whatever we are doing with our customers, security is just going to always be that drumbeat, especially for the CIO, CISO, CTO. Same thing with AI. I mean, first, when we did this study, it was a distinct area of pain, priority, a disproportionate amount of investment, which isn't surprising, right? But then now it's almost like just integrated in everything. So it's even getting harder to separate and say, okay, is this AI investment separate from I need to reduce cost or, and now it's a hardware shortage, so they can't do their AI, but they want, so you've got to solve this problem to answer this problem. So even when you have these buckets or areas that you feel really confident about, they're not necessarily always on an island, right? They're integrated in many ways. So can I help you reduce costs so you can move more money towards AI innovation? And that's the conversation you need to be having. So you've got to make sure when you go out to market and you're training your field to have these conversations that they don't think, oh, if they say no to this, I walk out the door. Like you pivot and go, okay, well, what's stopping you from doing that? Because you just said that was a priority, right?
So tell me how you took all of this customer data, structured and unstructured. And I love how you talked about, you even said you got to go out and meet with the people, right? Because actually in an organization, 90% of data is unstructured. It's the number one form of data that isn't connected to our AI tools, that isn't being analyzed and the trends and the patterns and things. And that's where a lot of the real insight comes in. Call transcript, that you're talking about, things like that. Interviews, as CMOs, when we take on a new role, what is the first thing we do? We start talking to customers and we say, hey, this isn't a sales conversation. I'm just here to learn, right? You get some or customer advisory board transcripts. I mean, some of the most important data that we have is unstructured. So you brought that all together, but tell us kind of some of the results that you're getting, and then we'll kind of backtrack in how you got there.
So like I said, first point was like going to all these different sources and then doing primary research. So I have always been a true believer in doing your own research, getting your own data set, and you end up being able to use that, also in marketing. Like you can create assets from it. So it's not only helping you understand how better to go to market, but from all that, we created, I call an integrated campaign. And really simply, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a synchronized marketing and sales framework that builds a narrative that aligns to the buyer journey around a specific theme that aligns with what customers are trying to do. And while that sounds really fundamental, I can't tell you, I think every time I've entered a company, I have moved marketing and then, the sales plays that go with that to this construct. And there's a whole integrated calendar and, editorial thing that goes with it. But at the end of the day, it's like creating that framework for integrated campaigns. Because what people want to do, even if they are super customer savvy, is they go back to wanting to go to market the way they're organized as a company. So by B, which then means doing it by product. And it happens over and over again. And a lot of you out there, I know, are nodding your head, because it can't be that I've worked for 6 companies that are the only ones in the world that do this, because I've talked to so many leaders that are, and it's not revolutionary, but it does take a culture shift, because there's so much pride in your products and we all fall in love with technology. The only reason we're in B2B tech is because we want to lift up the hood and go, oh my God, that engine just makes me so happy. And so you want to yell to the world, but we all know nobody buys products, right? And then add to it, we are an open source software company. So everything we do is in that open source development model. And no one thinks, in the morning, I'm going to go buy open source software, which is almost like an oxymoron, right? But that is a very common model that we now see, because the greatest innovation comes in open source communities. So if they don't want to buy a product and they definitely don't understand why they want to buy open source, then obviously leading with those things is not what you want to do when you're talking to a customer. You want to understand, what is keeping you up at night? How do I make life easier for you? How do I solve a big problem? And do I bring in partners? Do I show you how I integrate well and play nice with others, right? That's what they want to hear. And you're right. They've already done all that research beforehand, which means then you've really got to address that pain in everything that you're doing in content. So first, it's taking those and you create 3 or 4 buckets. I don't know what it is. There's always 3 legs of a stool. Sometimes it ends up being 4, depending on how big your portfolio is. But in this case, the thing I've learned over time is that you always want to have what I call the enduring brand campaign. So there's kind of this always on heartbeat that is a little bit above all of those pain points or customer challenge campaigns. And normally that happens around the emotion, like at the highest level. And the thing, and I'm just going to read this because I have this underneath that campaign. It says, I feel trapped at a loss of control, which was something I was just hearing again and again in all of the data and things that we were seeing. I need to do everything from cut costs to implement AI without compromising customer experience, security, or reliability. So every IT leader is on this balance beam, right? And at the end of the day, especially with AI and cybersecurity and costs, they feel like they are losing control. And by the way, it was interesting because the company I was at previously, which was Chronosphere, it was an observability company acquired by Palo Alto Networks. We heard the same thing. It was about a loss of control. My telemetry data is out of control. My cost of observability have now surpassed AWS. And so this feeling of control, at first it kind of surprised me. I'm like, wait, what's happening? But then I realized, oh my gosh, this is a bigger issue than observability. Like this feeling like I'm stuck, I'm trapped in these black boxes of vendor contracts, these proprietary solutions. I can't get out. I can't move out. I can't do whatever I want to do. I can't modernize as fast as I want to this feeling of I don't have control of the situation. That is the worst feeling in the world if you think about it. So that was kind of this choice campaign, which is customers want choice. They want flexibility. They want increased control. So think of that at the highest level. And then underneath it was, how do I improve operational efficiency and cost, which never goes away, by the way. That's been the 25 years I've been in IT. Our budgets are cut. We have to do more with less. We have to, do something different with everything we've got. We need to modernize our workloads, right? We're continuing to figure out how to improve our modernization play across hybrid cloud or whatever environment. We have to manage and secure everything we're doing, all the workloads we're doing across that hybrid cloud, right? So there's huge security management pain. And then the newer one is we always have to innovate, right? And now it's more around AI and edge are the terms, in our world that really come up because things are becoming out to the furthest and furthest edge, sensors, the tiniest things, and then AI is on everyone. So those were the four kind of pain-based things. And I always find I'm using verbs, like I need to innovate. I've got to optimize. And these are words that came up, right? And those are where we always will do a qualitative part of the research before the quantitative too. So I missed that. So aggregate all this data, everything you've got, unstructured, structured data. Now we use AI to say, okay, what are the themes? What are the words? What are the pain points, right? We go out and we do interviews, with a subset of our customer base and have them just talk freely. You then use those two inputs for quantitative to get data sets around that. So you can say 85% of people are now taking a hybrid cloud approach. This many people are staying on-prem. This much of workloads are containerized today, right? What is the trend around that? Whatever it is. And so then as you go to market, those campaigns, you're leading with that customer message. You have customer stories that validate that, right? And you have data from those customer stories. This customer reduced costs by 65% by doing this solution, right? You work with partners, so you bring them into it, right? Because it's not just your product, it's always solutions that are being brought together. So all of that works together. And then eventually it does go to products, right? Because they do have to buy a SKU. So you do want your field to know, what is that lead product? And marketing does need to show data to the business units and to engineering. Are we driving demand and revenue for your product? So you still have to have that association. And the thing that I've always done that I think works well is for each of those campaigns, you have what I call a lead or land product and a lead or land service. One of the things I've noticed is if you have services, as part of your portfolio, they often get missed in that sale. And data will show you've probably seen this, is that first of all, people love to buy services because it makes the deployment more successful, or it helps narrow down what that implementation is going to be, right? So it's either or after or both. And so how you think about, like, for example, for the modernized campaign, our lead product is SUSE virtualization, because the number one pain right now is around, frankly, getting off VMware or other virtualization legacy solutions. Like, people just need to move to the future. They want to get to containers. They may need to keep things on hypervisors, but they're trying to move that forward. And we have something called virtualization test drive or a kickstart. So those are our lead product and services, right? Then you've got things that follow that you can pivot to, or maybe it's an upsell, or cross sell later. So it all works together, and it's not going to be perfectly linear, but it kind of gives you this map and discovery landscape of how you can have the conversation.
So if you could take us through kind of the basics of understanding these pain points, and then you've got to turn that into something that's going to get attention, right? And you still can't talk product at that point, but there's a million of us out there trying to talk pain points, right? And that's something we've been drilled into our head. But it sounds like you tied some of the most emotional components of what they're feeling, like this loss of control. And what I'm taking away from what you're saying is, when I communicate that I truly understand not only your pain point, but what that means to you and how that affects you, then you start to break through, right? And so tell us a little bit about, like, how do you went differently to market with this?
Yeah, you said something really important, I think, because at the end of the day, if you can make your customer a hero, that is your ultimate goal. I mean, sure, your ultimate business goal is revenue and creating a sustainable business, but how do you do that? You make heroes out of your customers, right? And so we have the campaigns, then you build, okay, what is that plan? And one of the magical pieces that also sounds very foundational when I say it out loud is you then create a calendar where you can do this, depends how agile you are. I tend to have a quarterly theme. That tends to be the time frame. I work for companies that I've had to do 6 months because we just can't move the ship fast enough. But your quarterly theme takes one of those campaigns, and I call it the 80-20 rule. 80% of your marketing focuses on that theme. So we've been in the modernization campaign for this quarter, and it means that all marketing levers, so think PR, AR, content, video, social media, like I'm just saying, like every lever you have, you are emphasizing this pain point and you are emphasizing, this go-to-market campaign. And what I've seen happen every single time, it has never failed. If you do that and every lever is moving and everybody's focused on that, right? And your field is, by the way, out there having conversations, right? Because you're bringing in so many leads in pipeline, you're generating pipeline around this pain point, and which all builds on each other, but it moves the needle. And it may move the needle where you end up, having 5 new pages on the first page for SEO, or your AI visibility, literally in one point, some of our prompts jumped 12 points or something. It was insane. And granted, it's early times, right? All of that ideally helps your brand awareness, because this only works if you're also associating this, back to your brand. So I should have said that in the beginning, right? This is all based on brand awareness as well. But it's that combination of having those customer in themes and then focusing on a theme each time period where you really can get the content. And so that includes analyst content, analyst webinars, which perform really well. We do hands-on labs. You're also focusing on, your core personas. So you've got content, I like to say, are at the 100, 200, 300 level, right? So you're getting deeper technical. And as you build out all of that rich content, that helps continue to build that authority, continue to build that visibility. And that doesn't go away when you go to the next theme. Right now, you've got this foundation that you're growing from, and it just keeps adding. So anything new you add around that category just is frosting on this incredibly rich cake that you've built. And I also find it allows your teams to focus, which I don't know about you, but the number one thing I've always heard is, there's too much. I don't know what to focus on. I don't know what's priority or not. This P0, and it's really clear. In a CMO, you have to give everyone permission to say no to other stuff. Like, this is our priority right now, right? You're going to have other stuff that comes in, but if we don't all focus on this, then we'll just be whack-a-moling and we'll be back to where we started. And it's hard because, remember, you've got a lot of stakeholders internally that'll say, oh, but could we please do an energy industry campaign? Could we please do, something around this product? Could we please do this product, whatever? And the answer has to be, look, we're not doing anything. Like, there's still the baseline. That campaign is running. We're still investing in that area. It's just not the absolute focus where we are doubling down. And then lastly, I would say with all of that, you've got to have that distinctive point of view, that differentiation of, why do you want to listen to us? Why can you trust us? And then I also say, have a little fun, because the more you can just insert a little humor into it, because life is short and we're all so busy. And so we're testing something now that's about to launch, which is a human ad, like old fashioned ads. It's a company I've worked with before that is hysterical. And it's I'm going to see if it translates globally. We're going to start it in North America. It's very tongue-in-cheek humor. And we're doing it around the black box. And I'll just say, we make that black box literal and just have some fun with it. And so, and I think that kind of adds some energy to your marketing team, because at the end of the day, we all want to be creative. Yes, we're technical, but there's something about exercising that creative muscle and having something that literally makes you laugh out loud when you look at it, that is just joy.
So I have to ask, in our last conversation, you were about ready to go into a board meeting. And so we talked about that. And a lot of times as CMOs, we kind of dread the board meetings, right? And you were like, oh no, I'm excited. And like my CRO and I, we are locked, we are aligned, we know what we're doing. We've got great performance numbers. When you talked about focus amongst the team, alignment across the teams, for you to have that kind of alignment with sales and then that kind of performance, you could go into the board and be as excited about what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about that. And why you were so excited to go into the board, what you were taking into the board.
There were two things, and I remember talking about this, is that while we were doing this integrated campaign work, we were also really focusing on the quality of people, not just the numbers of people, quality over quantity, and really looking at marketing contribution to pipeline and close deals. And there were two things that we were able to show that I think were, why I was excited. And it did go very well. One was just looking at pipeline creation each week that was both marketing and sales contributed, and the portion of that was marketing contributed. And for the most part, we have gotten over who sourced what, and we're looking at, like what together are we creating? I will say that marketing contribution to pipeline has been averaging 40 to 45%, which is very high. At the end of the day, I don't care if we're all hitting our numbers, because it doesn't work if marketing is doing 45%, we're still not hitting our numbers. So whether it should be 30, 35, 45, like I don't care. It's more like, what are you able to do? And we should just celebrate, are we hitting pipeline numbers? And I think that's part of it, is like marketing has to own that number. And I think we spoke about that before. So that was one thing, is that we could show that trend over multiple weeks. And then the second thing was a really simple diagram. And while I do believe the funnel is gone as we know it, we still have to somehow show conversion, close rates. Like there's data we need to still show. And by focusing on quality, what we showed was our numbers at the very top of the funnel had gone down. So if I had just focused on what I thought we needed at top of funnel based on conversion rates going into this year, we would be behind. But conversion to qualification had also gone down. And you're like, oh shit. So we're getting less in the top and we're converting less to qualified. However, the conversion from qualification to number of meetings went up hugely. And the number of meetings that ended up being pipeline and then closed deals went up again, multiple points. So at the end of the day, what we ended up with pipeline and revenue was higher than our original targets, even if we had brought in tens of thousands more people at the time. And that was intentional, right? So at the top of the pipe or funnel, like that was very intentional. Like we locked it down. We made it harder for you to be qualified. So the number of people that were going to our ISRs and MDRs, yes, was less, but they were highly qualified. So many more of those went to that meeting where you got to pitch and kind of set up the next steps and went to pipeline. And at the end of the day, where does it matter, right? It matters that, are you talking to the right people? Are you having the right conversation? And are they becoming opportunities? And are you helping them solve that problem? So if we can continue to do that, and it's all because of the same thing, focus on the problems, make sure that they actually have that problem and are raising their hands saying, oh my gosh, yes, they're at the stage where they're starting to consider, because as you said, you got to reach them early, right? So that was the data set I showed. And I didn't think, we'd only done this one quarter. I didn't think we would see results of that work for 9 months. So the fact that the ship moved, and by proving this out over a quarter, actually flipped so quickly, like I was shocked. And so I had to show that to the board, and I showed it to everyone. It's like, everyone has to see this. Like, I'm not even sure what we did. And so it's very different. Oh, we did this, we changed this, we changed that. Like there were so many things going on. You couldn't say, oh, it's one thing. It was literally 20 things all working together, but it all lined back up to this focus and intentionality and integration, and everybody moving against the same things. And there's this great book called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? And it all goes back to that. Like, are you working on something that's going to make the boat go faster? And as you know, if you've got a bunch of people rowing and one of them's going this way, your boat's going to go nowhere.
Well, internal alignment is the number one challenge for B2B C-suite executives. Behind that, second is the lack of understanding of the customer. Third behind that is a focus on internal and external trust. And so what my takeaway from what you've talked about here today is you took customer obsession to a new level in order to make the decisions that aligned the company. I had on a CMO, and she's at a mid-market, so, mid to low enterprise level, go-to-market consultancy. And she said, 100% alignment is the biggest issue inside of B2B organizations today. And the number one change agent that aligns people internally across teams is the customer. So you solve alignment with the customer, You build trust with the customer when you understand more about the customer and you actually act as a customer obsessed organization.
And then I think you have to celebrate the customer. So the last part of that, whether you do that through customer awards, which we have, case studies, obviously, that also help the customer, because the customer is the hero of their own story and of your story, right? And I think the other thing that I've seen really successful is people love to get those case studies, love to do PR with customers, but are you also helping them internally, right? That helps you and it may help them externally. But why are so many companies struggling to get customer stories? It's because they're not seeing the value to them, right? And so you've got to align that. And kudos to my customer advocacy team. They've built amazing relationships. And another thing they've done is develop this peer-to-peer advocacy program where, a prospect or another customer can find and reach out to another customer and just say, hey, I saw you were using this product. How is it working? We're not there. Like, this is peer-to-peer. That's another value, right? Oh, you work with us, you get access to this network of peers. Because what does one CIO want? They want to know what the other CIOs are doing.
Right. Absolutely.
I think, celebrating them. And we just had our big event, SUSECon, where we had our customer awards. And, the one thing I've always said is like, that moment should be huge. Like, everyone on that stage getting that award should feel like this is like a big deal. I want them to feel like it's the Grammys or whatever it is. And so, and we had some really awesome categories and amazing names on that winner list, like brands you would know and recognize from around the world. How we brought people up on stage, how you celebrate those leaders, those companies, and make sure that the story is theirs. That is so important. It's not about you. Yes, your product helped deliver it, but, are you helping solve, like we have a Swiss Science Institute, and they talked about like, we are solving world problems here, Yes, it takes technology because the machines we're using are massive computing these massive algorithms and stuff. But that's the stories you want to hear. It's like, how are we changing the world? Because that makes it all worth it. I mean, it's so exciting.
I have to tell you, I always get to the end of our podcast and I feel like we need another one, right? If there was,
We could just have coffee. That's what we do in Seattle. So,
it's true. It's true. So if there was 30 seconds of, if there's one thing I want you to take away for the audience that'll be consuming this podcast, what's the one thing you want them to remember more than anything?
Customer in, not product out. If that's your mantra, you'll make the right decisions, right? Make that your filter. Is that customer in or product out?
I love it. You just won the award for the most concise, what's the single most important takeaway from this podcast? Nobody has ever said it in like a 3 sentence.
I can add more, as you know.
So I just want to say, Margaret, this is what this podcast is all about. It's bringing C-suite executives together. We're trying things differently. We're doing things differently. We're seeing what's working and we're sharing with our peers, right? And if we all do that, then I always call it the rising tide that lifts all boats. And once again, you were just an amazing part of that rising tide. I just want to say thank you.
You make it easy. Thanks, Steve. It's always fun.